We all know about the Sleeping Beauty, who fell into a magical coma after she pricked her finger on a bewitched spinning wheel. The prince saw the dragon and got into her tower, where he woke her with a kiss. They lived happily ever after. Beautiful, isn't it? Well, the real story is not as romantic. In fact, it's about a king who leaves his wife and kingdom, finding a sleeping girl in an abandoned place and can't wake her up. So what does he do? The king rapes the Sleeping Beauty and leaves back home to his wife. Apparently, sleeping girls were a big turn-on for the king, but what he didn't know was that he also left her impregnated by his seed. Sleeping Beauty gave birth to 2 children, a boy and a girl, while she was still asleep. 2 fairies appeared to care for the babies while their mother slept, letting them breastfeed on her sleeping body, until the day one of the babies gets one of her fingers in his mouth instead and sucks out the splinter, which immediately wakes her up. Later on, the Sleeping Beauty reunites with the king who had raped her, and he threw his wife into the fire so he could live with the girl he raped instead.
Rumpelstiltskin. The miller bragged to king she'd spin a twine of gold. The king would lock his daughter in tower dark and cold. She'd spin him endless riches, or else he'd have her killed. But if she proved her magic, a wife he'd make her still. And in her lowest moment, an imp it did appear, and spun her gold a plenty, exchanged her necklace near. The second night the imp did so exchange for mother's ring, and third, with nothing left of her, he'd take her firstborn king. The king did marry her, and give her endless riches, but when they had a child, the imp would reappear, and now he'd take them for himself unless she'd guess his name. Within 3 days she'd have to play and win his little game. The woman failed, and wept deep into evening, and walked she did through forest till she came upon a fire. She heard the imp did dance around, so joyful of his winning. His name he called out in the night, to brag and laugh in good glee. The final day the imp did come, and guess correct she did, and in his rage he stamped around and sunk into his grave. He pulled and pulled with all his might, and raged all that he knew. But in his rage he pulled too hard, and split himself in 2.
We all know the story of Pinocchio as told by Disney, about the little wooden puppet boy that wanted so desperately to become a real boy, guided the whole way by Jiminy Cricket, the voice of his conscience. But the true tale, written in 1940 that Disney based their story on, wasn't quite so pleasant. In fact, early on in the book, Pinocchio kills Jiminy by throwing a hammer at him. Later on, not having learned his lesson, Pinocchio falls asleep trying to dry his feet on the stove and gets his feet burnt off. But Geppetto caringly rebuilds his feet. But what you probably didn't know is that the story ended with the townspeople hanging Pinocchio from a nearby tree for hiding gold coins. Not quite the bright fairy tale we all remember.
A flowing red hair, green fin, and a best friend who is a fish. We all remember the singing, dreaming stalker girl who traded her voice for a pair of legs so she could be with Mr. Dreamy. Keep in mind that Ariel was only 15 years old when she made a deal with the Sea Witch. And what they left out from the Disney version of the movie, of how everything went down, are not dreamy at all. Not only did Ariel know the terms of the spell she agreed upon, the consequences were far more morbid and not child-friendly. The Sea Witch cut off Ariel's tongue so she could not be able to speak, and as her little mermaid got to the surface, her fin disappeared and got replaced with a pair of legs instead. Every step she took was an agony, as it felt like she was walking on knives, but she was okay with it, since she could be with Mr. Dreamy, that she had been stalking. All the things we do for love, right? Not only did the prince friend-zone her, but Ariel was one of the bridesmaids on his wedding with another woman, breaking Ariel's heart. She looked out over the sea, wishing to be back with her sisters again. That's when all of her sisters came to the surface. Their long hair had been cut off, and they explained to her if she wanted her voice back and return to the sea, all she had to do was stick a magical dagger into the prince's heart that they had traded their hair. Ariel could not do it. She threw the knife in the ocean and then dove into the water herself, turning into sea foam when she died.
Little Red Riding Hood. She donned a hood of red and shoes of supple leather. She'd walk the forest deep to see her sick grandmother. Her mother warned her, "Dear, don't stray away the path, for dangers lie in wait to hunt you like a rat." Now as she walked the path, deep in the darkened forest, she spied a pair of yellow eyes, cold swept along her spine. "Hello, little red girl. What are you doing here?" "I'm visiting my grandma, but far she is, so dear." "A shortcut you could take, and cut the time in two." And in her haste she did mistake the creature's lies for help. The creature followed close, and then he overtook, and beat her to her grandma's, and ate her head to foot. Along the girl did come, the woods so dark and sodden. Remember not this road, much longer it had taken. Of course you know the rest, but did you not know this? Deep voice, big eyes, and a larger mouth, he gobbled her to bits. Now let this be a lesson for all who travel far. Be wary of the shortcut, a safe route it would mar. Though danger does exist around most every corner, to get lost might be right, if only to adventure.
And now we come to the story of Hansel and Gretel. The original story we all know about the brother and sister left to wander the woods, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, which the birds eat, finding a gingerbread house, starting to eat it, which was a trap by a witch, and so on and so on. But the origins of the tale are a lot darker. The brothers Grimm based this tale on several European folk tales. It featured in a collection of stories that they wrote, but it's a cautionary tale. One example that Hansel and Gretel was based on was a Romanian story called The Little Boy and the Wicked Stepmother. The children are abandoned and find their way home following a trail of ashes. But when they return home, their stepmother kills the little boy and forces the sister to prepare his corpse for a family meal. The girl, while horrified, obeys, but hides the boy's heart inside a tree. Their father unknowingly eats his son, while the sister refuses to take part. Afterwards, Girl takes the brother's bones and puts them inside the tree with his heart. The very next day, a cuckoo emerges singing, "Cuckoo, my sister has cooked me and my father has eaten me but I am now a cuckoo and safe from my stepmother. The stepmother, terrified, throws a lump of salt at the bird, but it just falls back on her head and kills her instantly. But now you can see the darker origins of some of the more beloved fairy tales that we all grew up with. Not quite so bright and cheerful after all.